I was born in a very fortunate year, 1983. That means that I was a kid of the 80s and the 90s. So growing up watching horror films in the 80s and the 90s was an absolute dream come true for me, but also an absolute nightmare. I previously done a video on 80s horror films that kept me up at night. You can click on that link if you want to watch that, and if you were a kid of the 80s. But today, we're going to be talking about 90s horror films that kept me up at night. So if you are a kid of the 90s, guys, and you watched these horror films, let me know if they impacted you as well. But also, let me know your horror films that kept you up at night. First up, we've got Return of the Living Dead Part 3. Now, if you know me, and if you watched my previous video on the 80s ones, body horror is what scared me quite a lot growing up, because body horror relied on a lot of practical effects back in the 80s and the 90s. More so the 80s, because the 90s were kind of playing around with CGI, but this movie didn't. This movie played with practical effects, and that's what scared me the most, because I was scared to get hurt when I was a kid. If I see a cut or a break or anything like that, it would make me sick. So watching a film in the 90s as a kid, growing up watching these, I'm like, is that real or is it not? But that's not all Return of the Living Dead Part 3 offered. It was quite a sad film as well. Watching it as an adult, you realise the story behind it. But as a kid, all I'm really wanting to watch it for is the blood, the guts, and the gore. And we got all of that in this movie. Next up, we've got The Fear. Now, this is one that maybe not a lot of people have heard of, but it's about this wooden doll called Morty. It even spawned a sequel as well, which was terrible. And The Fear is terrible as well. But the premise of Morty, the wooden doll, is absolutely frightening to me as a kid. Now, I was about 11, 12 years old when this came out. So it's probably one of the newer films on the list, because after the age of 13, I stopped getting scared of films naturally. But The Fear was one of the last ones that scared me. But it wasn't because when I was watching the movie, I was scared. It was afterwards, because me and my friends, my sister, we would all talk about Morty. Morty's coming to get you. And then we wouldn't sleep at night. We would look at the bottom of our beds and we would think we would see Morty coming towards us. So I think it's the idea of Morty, this wooden doll, that scared us more than the actual movie. Next up, we've got Nightbreed. Now, I'll be honest, guys, when I watched this film in the early 90s, I had not a clue what this film was about. Even watching it as a teenager, I was like, what is this movie about? I just didn't really understand it. But looking at it now, understanding the problems that the production had for the film, I understand now why I didn't understand this film as a kid. Watching it as a kid, I was just mesmerized by how crazy everybody looked in this fictional place called, is it Meridian or whatever they are? Can't even remember now. In this place with all these monsters and creatures around, I was scared of these monsters and creatures. Watching it now and seeing the director's cut, seeing that these monsters are actually the good guys and the normal looking people were the bad guys, it played with my mind when I'm thinking back to this film as a kid. But when I was a kid, all I was interested in was those monsters, and I had a dream about those monsters, especially the guy that looked like a kind of moon shape. Frightened me to death. Next up, we've got Candyman. Now, personal friends of mine will know the reason why Candyman was a scary film to me. There were some scenes in the film that were quite haunting, like the scene in the car park when you could hear Candyman saying to Helen, Helen. That scared me. My sister would do that to me. I would do that to my sister in the pitch black, and we would both get freaked out. But the main reason Candyman scares me is because as a kid, as an 11-year-old kid, I was stung by a swarm of wasps. We counted 89 wasps that I was stung by. I had to go in a bath of vinegar, which was excruciatingly painful. And then it brought back memories of Candyman, because it happened just after Candyman came out. And people called me My Girl, Macaulay Culkin, but that movie didn't scare me. It was Candyman. Next on the list, we have The Witches, which I should be embarrassed by, because this is a kid's film. But watching it as a kid, I was scared by it. There was a scene that always scared me when Bruno, the little chubby kid that loves the chocolate, was walking up into this assembly hall, and the Grand High Witch, played by Angelica Houston, was standing on that podium, and she was getting all worked up when he was coming towards her, and then they start pulling off their masks, and they're all pulling off their shoes and things like that. That frightened me as a kid. The purple eyes, everything about those witches in that film scared me. There was another scene that also frightened me that shouldn't, when you see that little girl in the painting that disappears and comes back again. I don't know why, but as a kid, anything can scare you. And it's a kid's film at the end of the day, and it scared me. Next up, we've got Child's Play 2. This is similar to a Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, where the second film is scarier than the first film. And in this case, that's true, but it's also funnier as well. But I think what makes this one scary is because Chucky is front and center. The situations that they're in, the house that they're in as well, was quite scary, quite eerie, quite off putting as well. And I think that was intentional. So the look and the feel of this film is scary. Then you go to that big warehouse at the end. Chucky is totally menacing in this film. He's got the knife that goes into the wrist. He's melting. The look of Chucky is scarier as well. There's scenes where when Chucky comes out of that closet in the school and he's whipping that ruler on his hand, going after the teacher. Just all frightening scenes for a kid of my age. Next up, we have The Haunted. This is a TV movie, and it's based around the Smurl family, if you don't know the story, and it's probably going to be The Conjuring 4, as far as I'm aware. But the Warrens go to help this Smurl family, and it looks terrible. It's a TV movie, and today you could probably laugh at it, but if you watch this as a kid, some of the scenes in it, especially the interactions with the ghosts, are frightening. Even there's a scene where Janet is doing the ironing, and then she sees this black puff of smoke and it disappears into the next wall. That scared me because of her reactions to it. The end of the movie is probably the most famous scene, where you hear her mother saying, "Janet," and she's like, "I'm in here, Mom. Janet, Mom, I'm in here." And this is when they think that the ghosts are gone. And then she turns around to the camera and just looks, and you just see, "Janet." And I'm like, oh my goodness. And that gave me goosebumps. Even today, it still gives me goosebumps because of how I remembered it as a kid. Next up, and probably an obvious one, is It from 1990. Of course, this isn't a movie, it's a miniseries, but it's kind of packaged as a film, and it was packaged as a film when I watched it as well, so we'll put it on the list anyway. Who isn't scared of clowns, especially young kids? And when I was growing up in the early 90s, we had something called the killer clowns in transit vans. It was an urban legend in Scotland where we think that these people dressed as clowns are going around schools with vans and they're taking kids away and killing them, and we truly believed that that was true, to the point where people said, "I saw it, I saw it." And even my teachers in school would have an assembly and tell kids to be looking out, be vigilant. And it's very similar to what happens in It. So when you watch It, you're like, that's what's happened to us right now in Scotland. It's scary. So when you add that to the layers of Pennywise being scary anyway, then of course it's going to scare you as a kid. Next up, we've got The Exorcist 3. Now, of course, I was just a child at the time watching this, so the storyline went way over my head. Even today, the storyline is quite convoluted, but still a good film. But The Exorcist 3 has some of the greatest, if not the greatest, scare scene ever. When you see that scene with the shears, the scissors, I jumped out of my whole entire body when I watched it when I was younger. When I watched it as a teenager, I actually forgot about that scene. And then when it happened again, I jumped out my skin. And I wasn't scared, I just got a jump. But when you watched it for the very first time as a kid in the 90s, that sticks with you. When I'm in my bed at night, when I was a kid, our door would look out into a long hallway, similar to the film. And at the end of the hallway was my bathroom, but you can't see it because it goes around the corner. And if the light was left on at night, because I wanted the light left on half the time, if the door was opened, I would look down the hall and I would always picture that nurse going past and then those scissors coming right after her, and I couldn't sleep at all. Lastly, we have Castle Freak. And simply, Castle Freak scared me because of the body horror again. What we didn't see was also scary because the film is quite dark, so there was some scenes where you couldn't see much. We also see the point of view of the monster, the killer as well. So there's a lot that we don't see, but that was also scary. I like the setting of the film. I love isolated horror films, and setting it the way they did was quite genius. And I think the reason that I like isolated horror films is because I watched a lot of films like this growing up as a kid and remembering being scared of those types of movies. So as an adult, I want to see those types of movies again because it takes me back to my childhood and being scared of these types of films. But ultimately, it was the body horror that got me with Castle Freak. So that is the 90s horror films that kept me up at night as a kid, of course. But what are the 90s horror films that kept you up as a kid? And if you're from a different decade, not to fear, I do have an 80s one, which I'll link somewhere. If you're a kid of the 80s only, then watch that video as well. But if you're a kid of the 80s, the 90s, or whatever decade, let me know what horror films kept you up at night. And as always, thanks a lot for watching. Thanks for subscribing, and I'll see you soon.
Meeting adjourned.
I'll be right back.
What are you waiting for, huh?
Coming to get you, Barbara.
Ever played in the cat?
Someone's in the back!